that school down south. Mike, thanks for that kind introduction, and I want to thank all of you for the opportunity and the privilege to spend time with you this afternoon. Today I live out in the heart of the Silicon Valley, literally 100 yards away from Google's headquarters, which is right across from my office. LinkedIn is right behind my office, and Facebook's one exit up. But I grew up in a place as far away from the Silicon Valley as they could ever imagine. I grew up in a little town called Canova, West Virginia, just southwest of here, population 3,500 if you round up. Before the Spring Valley Timberwolves, it was the Cerrito Canova Wonders when I was there. And it was an idyllic childhood for me. There were formative moments in my childhood that basically have shaped who I am and how I view the world. And I haven't forgotten those, and I want to share a couple of them with you. The first was when I was 6 years old, and a plane carrying 75 souls crashed into the trees just about a half a mile away from my house. And I got to see at that moment in time that life's a team sport. I saw a community rise from the ashes. I saw a university rebuild itself. I saw its big sibling university up here actually reach out and help it as well. And it taught me that we are all born angels with one wing. The only way we fly is by holding on to each other. Then in 4th grade, I had a crush on a little redheaded girl. She beat me in a spelling bee. The next day, she gave me a note and said, "You can't be my boyfriend because you're stupid." That night, I went home, and my IQ didn't go up, but my work ethic did. And I learned education is simply applied effort. 9th grade, I had a really good friend who decided to get into Golden Gloves boxing, and then he wanted to practice on his friends and eventually turned into a bully, and it made it a horrible year for me in the 9th grade. I finally stood my ground. I lost. I was embarrassed. I went home to see my daddy. I thought for sure he would be ashamed of me, and he told me he was never more proud. Because courage isn't the absence of fear, it's a willingness to stand up and face it. And then the last is this ring. My mom and dad didn't get a chance to go to college, but they made a promise to themselves and to their 3 boys that all of us would get a college degree. And they made that happen. And my dad passed away in 1996 in his 2nd term as mayor of Canova. My mom's still living in Canova, and I'm going to go spend the weekend with her this weekend. But my brothers and I wear this ring every day to remind us of moms and dads who actually keep their promises, and for me to give the gift of education to every place that I go and any way that I can give back. So that's why education is important to me. And so when you wrap that up in a bow, I left this state 30 years ago now. I've lived in 10 states, 5 companies, 3 industries. But I took with me the lessons from West Virginia: integrity, humility, and teamwork. Now, I've had a chance to come back here pretty often over the last few years, and every time I come home, I'm even more proud. I am proud of who we are. I'm proud of what we're capable of being. And I'll tell you, from the earliest days, this state and the mountains and the topography broke the backs of lesser men and women. And wagon trains used to go around this state. But the ones that settled here were the hardiest of the hardy. And I tell people, God created a very special human being when he created a mountaineer. And yes, when he created the thundering herd. I've got to throw that in there as well. Because we are a people that rise to a challenge. We're a people that persevere, we have grit, and we look for ways to get around the obstacles. And now is our time, because our state faces some very visible and very difficult challenges. But I don't think these challenges are intractable. And so the focus of my comments today that I want to spend some time with you talking about is how we prepare the next generation of West Virginians and the next generation of West Virginia to be prepared for the future. Now, to do that, I'm going to take you through a little exercise we practice in the Silicon Valley, out there where we hug trees and eat nuts and, very liberal, and trees grow to the sky and money flows in the rivers. But we have this exercise called the 10-year test. I sit in a Silicon Valley roundtable every quarter with 23 CEOs. And we do this test, which is, what do you wish your predecessors would have done differently 10 years ago that would have left you in a better situation today? And I tell you, we have a field day because we're grading somebody else's work, and hindsight's 20/20. But then the second question is, what do you think those that will be sitting in these seats 10 years from now wish we would have taken on today that would have left them in a better position 10 years from now? And that's where it gets tough, because that's called stewardship, delivering for those who need today while sacrificing and making the necessary decisions to make sure those who come tomorrow will have an even better future. Now, to do that, I want to talk a little bit about change, and I'm going to talk about some of the lessons that we've learned as we've gone through that 10-year test. First of all, here's the secret on change. Everybody's for it, until it happens to them. But change can either happen through you or to you. It's your choice. Now, I just took our company. We're a 34-year-old startup. We were actually born in the era of DOS. We've had to reimagine ourselves over multiple decades. But I just took us through a 10-year test. I took our top leaders in the company, and I framed 8 questions that I thought are going to shape the world over the next 15 to 20 years. Those questions include things like artificial intelligence and IBM Watson. They include things called conversational user interfaces, which is a big fancy word for voice, like Amazon Alexa or Apple Siri. It also includes things like disruptive business models we see happening in China right now that they're trying to come into the United States with. But the area I'm going to focus in on is we studied digital natives. They're not millennials. Digital natives were born after the invention of the iPhone, which means they're under the age of 10. And we followed them home. We weren't stalkers. Their families invited us in. And we spent hundreds of hours observing them, studying them, working with neuroscientists to try to understand what makes them think and how they behave. And what I want to do is I want to take all that learning and I'm going to package it up into 3 messages for you today. What I believe and we believe, who the students and the workers of the future will be, number 1. Number 2, what will be the most important jobs that they will get excited about. And number 3, what are the skills we need to begin to prepare in them today so that they can be successful and West Virginia can be successful tomorrow. You ready? All right, here we go. First, the students of the future. And to be more specific, these are actually the students in elementary school today under the age of 10, the digital natives. Right off the bat, it's a generation unlike any generation we have ever seen before. Neuroscientists will tell you their brains are wired differently than ours. They don't have to store information. If you ask them what their phone number is, they can't tell you because it's always on a phone. If you ask them to memorize something, they say why, because they can Google it and find the answer faster. So they don't really have a brain that's developing the ability to remember as much, but they know where to access something because they know that's where the information is. The second thing is they are used to a nonstop flow of information and always-on connectivity. As a result, they want immediacy and high interactivity. A case in point, the average digital native today switches devices 27 times in an hour. Tablet, phone, TV, you got it, back and forth. Now, they have actually developed a skill called continuous partial attention. We as adults say, put away that phone and focus on your homework. You can't do 2 things at once. Oh, yes, they can. If you actually hook up our brains go red and green when we multitask. Their brains actually show parallel processing to up as many as 4 tasks. They have the ability to do multiple things, but that means they want immediacy, they want lots of experiences, they want a very vibrant, interactive environment. But here's a couple of cons that this generation's growing up with. First of all, the average attention span of a digital native, as measured by neuroscientists, is 8 seconds. It was 12 seconds 4 years ago, and to put that into context, the average attention span of a goldfish is 9 seconds. Now, that's one. Number 2 is because of the always-on belief, information overload, and the social pressures of always needing to be connected, this generation is growing up with higher levels of stress and depression than's ever been diagnosed in a generation before them. I share that with you, and there's a lot more that we've learned to basically say as educators, legislators, business leaders, we need to deeply understand this next generation. We need to think about our education system morphing to maximize their potential because they're developing different than us. And we need to create work environments and jobs that actually cater to the things that they want to do so they can be the best version of themselves that they want to be. So that's one big thing. That is the who we're going to be dealing with: students, employees, and future leaders. The second, the kinds of jobs in the future. Now, just a handful of years in the technology industry, how many of you have heard of Moore's Law? So Moore actually used to work for Intel, and it was this algorithm that predicted how quickly a silicon chip would progress, and as a result, how often technology platforms would shift. Moore's Law used to be able to predict that there would be a massive shift in technology every 4 to 6 years. Now, with the advances of mobile, sensors and everything, data, cheap processing, it's happening 10x faster. Every 6 to 12 months, there's a disruptive shift happening in the market. Now, these future trends are already all around us. They're impacting students, they're impacting legislators, they're impacting states, they're impacting leaders. Let me just draw a few of these out for you. First of all, social media. It's changed who we are and how we think. We no longer are end users. We now expect to be participants. We customize everything. We have a unique ringtone. We choose what apps we download on our devices. We choose what friends we're going to friend or defriend. We choose what news we're going to follow. Everything in the future needs to be personalized. The second is the cloud. The cloud has no borders. The borders between geographies have come down. The expectations of things working across multiple devices has become the norm. The third is mobile has won. 2007, we saw the computer move from the desktop to the palm of our hand in the form of a smartphone. Now it's wristwatches, eyeglasses, and automobiles. We used to watch the Jetsons and Star Trek. It's here. And then there's big data and machine learning. The ability to take algorithms and data and match them up to do amazing things that human beings could not have ever imagined before. And by the way, 90% of the world's data has been created in the last 2 years because of all the sensors and all the smart devices around us. That's leading to two other phenomena very quickly. One is the companies in the states that are winning are tapping into these combinations of large platforms and creating something called a network effect. I'll talk more about the network effect in a minute. And the last piece, and this is the mind blower, this is pretty recent, there's this new phenomenon called conversational user interfaces. Voice, Amazon Alexa, Apple Siri, Microsoft Cortana, Comcast talking into the remote. And here's what it means. They figured out, we learned to speak at about 9 months, we learned to type and write much later. Human beings are able to do things faster if they talk. Amazon has figured out that you can shop 3 times faster talking to Alexa than you can checking out on Prime. And I thought one-click checkout was fast. So these are the changes that are disrupting industries, changing expectations, and reformatting the kinds of jobs. What's that mean to us? 2 fundamental jobs that I think are ultimately going to shape the destiny of every nation and every state in this nation. 1, this freelancer or gig economy. And I'll talk more about it in a minute. And then number 2, the rise of importance on the builder. Again, this time the digital builder. So let me talk about the gig economy, then I'm going to talk about the builder. So first of all, the gig economy. If you don't know what a freelancer is, these are people who do not work for a company full-time. They work for multiple companies. They're paid as a contractor. Despite popular belief, this was not invented by Uber or TaskRabbit or DoorDash. In fact, 25 years ago, 17% of the population in the United States worked as contractors. Today, it's 36%. In the year 2020, it's expected to be 43%, almost half of the nation's jobs. It is not the underemployed. In fact, if you interview millennials in their 20s, only 13% ever want to work for a company. They want to work as a freelancer because, like their younger digital native brothers and sisters, they like immediacy and multiple experiences, and they want to test drive everything and just do a little bit of everything. And we need to understand this as we start to create jobs, educate students, and think about the kinds of companies we want to create to keep their interest level long enough that they don't jump from one company to the next. The second thing that I want to talk about is digital builders. I said a few minutes ago, we live in a different world now. This world's in the cloud with computers in the palm of our hand, powered by this thing called big data and machine learning, and now we're starting to talk to our devices. To thrive and survive in this world, we have got to inspire in our students a love for STEAM. Science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. Do not forget the arts. There is a reason why Apple outsells Android. Android has more technology. Apple is easy and intuitive to use because it was elegantly designed, and the simple will always beat the complex. So we need those kinds of skills being developed. Just as our kids, just as we had to learn how to write in cursive, our kids are going to have to learn how to build apps and write code. That is the future of the education. Now, I want to say a couple things because I don't want to take us down this STEAM path without looking past another important trend. Tim Cook. Does anybody know who Tim Cook is? CEO of Apple. Just got interviewed on 60 Minutes. Put out a call to action to the United States. We do not have enough skilled tool and die makers. In fact, his estimates are if you take all the skilled tool and die makers in the United States, you could fit them in this one room. If you go to China, it takes multiple football fields to have them stand out there side by side. Apple needs more skilled tool and die makers. As a nation, we have got to respect and re-embrace the industries that build, that do things with their hands. At the same time, these industries are going to have to realize the things we're building going forward aren't the same things we built looking back. Now, I'm going to ask you to forgive me for 1 minute because I am not someone who believes that reskilling is hard. In fact, I don't know about you, but if I've ever taken a problem to a mechanic or a craftsman and I describe the problem and I leave, I come back, somehow the lawnmower's working. Somehow my car got started. Somehow they fixed it. If you give them the tools and the training and say it used to be a screwdriver, now here's how you type this command in, they will figure out how to solve the problem. We just have to invest in it. Which takes me to my third and final point. What are the skills that we need to begin to teach today, and how do we need to think about this from an educational perspective to prepare our generation that's growing up in West Virginia for the jobs of tomorrow? And I'll start with one very important uber skill: creative problem solving. It is the heart of entrepreneurialism, and it is the #1 skill needed as we look to the future. I said a few minutes ago, the pace of change used to be every 4 to 6 years. Now it's every 6 to 12 months. It's 10 times faster. We don't live in a world any longer where the answer is right or wrong. We live in a world that is changing so quickly that it is constant contingency planning with scenario planning and options. And I want to kind of draw this case to a point for you. Today, in the Silicon Valley, 9 out of 10 companies that succeed on a business idea that's completely different than the one they started out with. In fact, one of the most popular books in the Silicon Valley is called Getting to Plan B by Randy Komisar, which is basically how do you learn to run experiments and pivot and end up with the idea that's most promising. Now, here's how we practice this, and this is a very pragmatic skill we can start to teach. Toyota Production System. Toyota Production System came up with this concept called 7 to 1. What they teach their employees is to fall in love with the problem and not the solution. So when they define the problem, their employees are challenged to come up with 7 different ways they could solve that problem before they're allowed to present to their management team the one they think is the most promising. The Silicon Valley has adopted it. It used to be called plagiarism, now it's called benchmarking. We call it go broad to go narrow. And so when we have a new technology idea, we challenge our engineers to show us 7 different ways they could solve that problem before they can come and tell us the one that was the most promising. This is a skill that's been packaged up that we should be teaching kids starting in elementary school, because it is a fundamental skill that every employer is looking for today, and we're having to teach it ourselves because kids are coming out with pass-fail, right or wrong, yes or no, and that is not the world we live in anymore. So that's one. The second thing that I'll leave you with is if we're teaching our kids how to write business plans, it's necessary but not sufficient. The venture capitalists out in the Silicon Valley realize that 90% of the businesses that succeed will succeed on an idea completely different. So what they test for when someone comes in and makes their pitch in the Shark Tank is what was the prototype that the startup built and how did they think about the problem. They don't even read the business plan because they know 90% of them will be wrong in 6 months. So we shouldn't only think about business plans, we should be thinking about how we teach them how to develop prototypes and just go broad to go narrow 7 to 1 technique. Now, I'll wrap up with this last piece. To grow this next generation, starting with students, becoming entrepreneurs, becoming those that will work in jobs and industries and help us reshape our state, I think we're also going to have to evolve our notion of what a successful education looks like. In addition to rethinking how we inspire creative problem solving and a love for STEAM in our education system, I also think we need to begin to embrace alternative forms of education. And here's what I mean. College is simply one form of learning, and I'm a big fan. I am blessed to have a 4-year degree from Marshall and a master's degree from Aquinas College, and I continue to go take advanced executive programs everywhere I can. But there are other ways to learn. Germany today, 60% of the nation graduated from vocational schools, and they are the most productive and industrious economy in the world. They don't have that primary emphasis on just college. Another example closer to home is Massachusetts. The governor recently went out online and said, we have a crisis. We have an entire generation of electricians about to retire, and our entire state is so focused on Cambridge and Harvard and everything else that we have no one to take their place. And he's begging them to teach the next generation how to use their hands and become electricians. We have to think about a portfolio of options, programs that can teach these skills. And by the way, there's a new form of vocational school now, and I know you've heard me talk about it before, coding boot camps. Coding boot camps can take anyone out of a coal mine, out of high school, and in a matter of months teach you how to write computer code so you can be a part of the future going forward. So I think these are the important things as we think about education: creative problem solving, a love for STEAM, and a portfolio of learning options that include using your hands or using your head, because collectively all those things are going to be needed. I'll finish with this, and then I'll take questions. It's not going to happen overnight. China has a 100-year plan. Ireland wrote a 2-generation plan. They actually dug their way out of industrial blight, addiction that wasn't opioids, but it was alcoholism, and put together a pillar that said we need education, infrastructure, and entrepreneurism. And they're now the Celtic tiger of the European Union. Or you can look just to the west at Pittsburgh or to Akron, Ohio, or to lots of other places that have reimagined themselves and developed a plan to create a next chapter of great. I can tell you, I believe this state has some of the greatest assets and the greatest opportunities of any state in the nation. We have students graduating from Marshall and West Virginia University flying out to Silicon Valley, getting tested against Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and others, and getting the job. And all I get asked by my peers is, where are these kids coming from? Do you have any more? I don't want to tell the secret because I want more kids to be able to stay here. We've got to create the opportunities and the jobs here. But until we have that, I'm going to bring as many as I can out there, teach them the skills that we can, and then try to get us all to come back. Because we have the opportunity to create the next chapter of great. But it's got to start somewhere. It has to start with someone. So I'm going to ask you, what will the legislators and the educators in 2027 sitting in this room wish we had done today to leave them in a better position tomorrow? I believe we have the answers and we have the talent. We just have the stick-to-itiveness to make it happen. There's an old baseball quote, you can't steal second base with one foot on first. Let's lean into the future, and with that, I'll open it up to questions. Thank you very much.
How are you?
I'm doing great. I get a little fired up here. I hope I didn't put.
Oh, I can tell you do.
Tell you.
I'm Bill White. I'm on the State Board of Education, and starting next week, I will be moving into a position with the governor on his cabinet.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I have a history of working in Silicon Valley. I was there when it really started to boom, and I used to work for ALZA, A-L-Z-A Corporation.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
950 Page Mill Road. I'm sure you know where that is.
There you go. I know exactly where it is.
Absolutely. One of the things I think that, by the way, I really enjoyed and learned a lot from your conversation on the digital natives and also on millennials.
Thank you.
Because I think you were right on target. However, one of the things that I missed was the impact that diversity has.
Yes.
And you know, I think sometimes in Silicon Valley you take that for granted. Yeah. In places like West Virginia, we don't do a good job of that.
Yeah.
So would you talk a little bit more about it? Because you know, I know that Silicon Valley is quite diverse, and you're looking for talent and not necessarily looking for a black person or a white person or a woman or a disabled person or whatever. You're looking for talent. Somehow we got to get to the point where we're doing that here in West Virginia. And so you want to talk a little bit about the importance of living in a diverse society and making sure you're using all of your people.
Yes, sir, I do. Thank you so much. I'll start with this. The Gallup poll, the Gallup company, Gallup Research, they work closely with Joyce, West Virginia University. They've done a lot of work, and basically over lots of years they've discovered something. God was egalitarian when he handed out talent. Unfortunately, man hasn't been egalitarian when he handed out jobs. Jobs are in certain states on coasts, and we've got a lot of people who are equally talented spread out in all kinds of other areas. And you can test entrepreneurial skills and talent, whether it's inner city, it's Appalachia, or it's Silicon Valley, and the top of the top test exactly the same way, regardless of what education system they had. Unfortunately, the jobs aren't equally diverse. So we have to create an environment where we have to proactively seek diversity, because diversity creates better ideas and better outcomes. Why is that? Because we serve a diverse population, and if you don't have people in your organization that represent the end users, whether it's students or it's customers, then you're not going to have the deep empathy to understand what that individual's dealing with, and therefore you can't tailor your message. There is an exercise that we do in the Valley. It's called the survival exercise, and some of you may have gone through it. You're given some hypothetical, like you're stranded on the moon, you have 16 items from an inflatable raft to a Bic lighter to a pack of matches to an aerosol can, and you have to stack rank from 1 to 16, what's the most important to least important to get to the other side. And you're given 30 minutes to do it as an individual. And most people take 10 minutes when they're doing it by themselves. Then you're put with 5 other people in the room, and you get to take your list of 16 and their list of 16, and you get an hour and a half to actually come up to an agreement on the 16 that you want to do. Most people have to ask for an extra 30 minutes. It takes 2 hours. And everyone's frustrated. You look at them, people pushed away from the table. Some aren't participating. Somebody's taken over, and they're basically talking over everybody else. But the reality is this. The lowest scoring group always scores higher than the highest scoring individual. The best ideas come from diversity, from conflict, from debate. So what do you have to do, and what do I try to insist on doing? Insist on a diverse slate of talent. So anyone who comes in, I have right now a real passion for getting more women in engineering. We currently have 29% of our women engineer leaders, and the Valley's at 14. And I had somebody say to me the other day in an employee town hall, Brad, do you think we're going too far? You keep insisting on women. And I said, well, the last time I checked the math, 51% of the world are women. And right now we're at 29. When we get to 52, I'll consider it a problem. That's what we have to do. So we need to think about that. And by the way, West Virginia, we have to think about it as well. We've got to be willing to accept those ideas from the outside. And at the same time, we have to be willing to have our people go out and learn new things and come back home and not consider them as having gone native and forgotten where they're from. I sometimes run into that. Hey, you know what? You may have been West Virginia, but man, that sounds pretty California to me. And I said, hey, he who steals from me steals twice. I never had an original idea. I stole it. I'm bringing it back here for us. That's what we got to think about. It's benchmarking. So anyway, sorry, I get a little fired up, man. I feel like I'm in a church sermon now.
Questions?
Others? Oh, no, I've scared you.
Here you go.
Thank you. I wrote down a couple notes while you were talking, and one of the ones that struck me was education is applied effort.
Yes.
And the other one I wrote down was we need to rethink how in education. And
Yeah.
I'd like to tell you I have 3 daughters. One is incredibly smart. She's a kindergartner, amazingly intelligent. She's a little shy, so her system of learning is one way. My middle daughter is hands-on. She's an associate of science nursing student. She needs hands-on learning. That's what motivates her. My oldest daughter is a dance. She got a BFA in dance. She's motivated by her love of dance and the arts. Clearly, all 3 different. And I would wonder, I come in today into this room as a believer in the idea of freedom and flexibility and choice in education because of what I've experienced as a parent. And I would wonder your ideas for that how you talked about and how it intersects with flexibility from the student's perspective. And the other question I would have is the red-haired girl who beat you in the spelling bee.
Yeah.
Where is she now?
She's a doctor in Cincinnati. She's still smarter than me. It's okay. You got to know your limitations. I just surrounded myself with people smarter than me, and they actually somehow rub off, and I'm able to ride the wave with them. So I'll start with the first point about applied effort. I believe that. I believe the smartest people I ever met were my mom and dad. Mark Twain used to say at 15, my dad was the dumbest man I ever met. By the time I was 18, it's amazing how much he learned in 3 years. But it is true. Wisdom comes in so many different ways, but many times it comes from our scar tissue and the mistakes that we make that we can turn into lessons we teach others. There's a book out right now that proves that. It's a book called Grit. It's one of the best-selling books on Amazon. It's a 30-year psychology study where they studied the predictive nature of whether IQ, talent, or perseverance were the most predictive of those who succeed. I won't ruin the plot because you can tell from the thing, but the number one predictor of success is perseverance. Those who are willing to work harder, and it literally is basically the level playing field. Now let's talk a little bit about this customization. 3M, the manufacturing company, years ago developed this concept called unstructured time or white space. Google famously copied it, and it's now called 20% time. We have the same thing at Intuit. And what it basically does is you articulate as a business leader a grand challenge or a problem that you have not figured out how to solve. And then you give your employees 20% of their time to work on any idea or thought and run experiments that they think will actually help solve that problem. And then if they run an experiment and they can prove to you there's a reason to believe, we keep a little bit of money back in their back pocket. So I have a CEO fund. It's like a venture capital fund, and I fund the experiment for another 90 days. Let me tell you what that's produced. I'll tell you a story first. TurboTax, 2007, Steve Jobs invents the iPhone. I fly down to see our engineers. I said, man, this looks like this could be big. How are we going to have this work with taxes? And they said, are you kidding me, Brad? It takes an hour and 40 minutes for someone to sit in front of a computer and do their taxes on TurboTax. How are they going to do it on that little screen? And I said, I have no idea. But if somebody figures it out, it better be us or we're in trouble. Last year, 35 million people did their taxes with TurboTax. 50% of them did it on the phone. And they took pictures of the documents, and the computer read it and pre-filled the entire form, and they got done in less than 30 minutes. From an hour and 40 to 30. Now, I didn't have the answer. I simply asked a question and then created the space, and they came up with it. We've now produced $400 million in revenue in the last 3 years from ideas that our employees actually came up with solutions, not anything that I made up in a staff meeting. So that's what we need to do with education. We've got to think about, can we create an environment that doesn't lower the standard or expectations, but begins to think differently about how we create a learning environment where they can actually try different experiments and hows to still get to the outcome. Again, I'm putting the grand challenge in front of you. I don't have the recipe, but there are people in this room much smarter than me, as my 4th grade redheaded friend would tell you, and I'll bet we can figure something out.